I want to know what it is that we should do, and especially I want to know whether it is time, in fact, to abandon the American dream. Obviously, the first element is concern. We've got to care that it happens. We have got to do what we can to change the warp and woof of moral thought in society in such fashion as to try to make it happen less and less. Let me urge this point to you, which I can do with authority, my friends, the only thing that I can tonight. And that is to tell you that in the United States, there is a concern for the Negro problem. Now, if you get up to me and say, the trouble in America where the Negro community is concerned is a very complicated one. I urge those of you who have an actual rather than a purely ideologized interest in the problem to read the book Beyond the Melting Pot by Professor Glaser, also co-author of The Lonely Crowd, a prominent Jewish intellectual, who points to the fact that the situation in America where the Negroes are concerned is extremely complex as a result of an unfortunate conjunction of two factors. One is the dreadful efforts to perpetuate discrimination by many individual American citizens as a result of their lack of that final and ultimate concern which some people are truly trying to agitate. The other is as a result of the failure of the Negro community itself to make certain exertions which were made by other minority groups during the American experience.
Now, that is an interesting point that I want to just focus on for a moment, because the idea of comparing blacks to other minority groups and other people who have come to this country, that whole ideology started coming up, particularly when Asian Americans started feeling the effects of discrimination and really attacks caused by COVID and by the conservative right pushing this idea that it was the China virus, that Chinese people were responsible for this virus. And one of the things I started seeing online, particularly in videos, is that there is a phenomena that Asian Americans are very much aware of, which is sort of known as the ideal immigrant, and that Asian Americans are seen as the ideal immigrant, as opposed to African Americans who are not. Well, first of all, African Americans are not immigrants, at least not the ones that came here on slave ships. They did not immigrate here, although you do have, of course, black immigrants who come from other countries. But this idea of pitting groups against one another, he starts with Jews, and then he goes into the Irish or Italians and others. But the idea to pit these groups against one another as if they are and their problems are all the same is a very regular tactic of denial. All right, so going back to the video.
Not of my own making, let me give you one which Professor Glaser considers as relevant. He says, for instance, in 1900, there were 3,500 Negro doctors in America. In 1960, there were 3,900, an increase in 400. Is this because there were no opportunities, as has been suggested by Mr. Haycock and also by Mr. Baldwin implicitly? No, says Professor Glaser. There are a great many medical schools who are by no means practice discrimination, who are anxious to receive and to train Negro doctors. There are scholarships available to put them through, but in fact that particular energy, which he remarks was so noticeable in the Jewish community and to a certain and lesser extent in the Italian and Irish community, for some reason is not there. We should focus on the necessity to animate this particular energy, but he comes to the conclusion, which strikes me as plausible, that the people who can best do it, who can do it most effectively, are Negroes themselves.
One thing you might do, Mr. Buckley, is let them vote in Mississippi.
Want to pause right here for a minute, because I just want to remind viewers that this is happening in 65, as I said. So the issues that we now sort of talk about in sort of circular terms, or, you know, kind of blithely about, was very much in the mindset and very much in the idea of the people of this time. Remember, this is 65, so the Voting Rights Act either has just been signed into law or is about to be signed into law. You know, the Southern Democrats, Dixiecrats, were filibustering. Strom Thurmond famously filibustered, the longest filibuster at that time, may still be, of a piece of legislation. It would eventually, of course, pass, but the whole idea of voting and voting rights, this person shouts out at a crowd that let them vote in Mississippi, is what's going on in Mississippi. It's going on in the South. It's going on in America. And it's very much on the mindset of the people here during this debate. So that's one thing I just wanted to bring up, is he's shouting about let the people vote. That's what the shouting is. And he has a response. And by the way, this response is very interesting. I'll talk about it on the other side why.
I agree. I couldn't agree with you more, and for except lest I appear too ingratiating, which is hardly my objective here tonight. I think actually what is wrong in Mississippi, sir, is not that not enough Negroes are voting, but that too many white people are voting. Booker T. Washington said that the important thing where Negroes are concerned is not that they hold public office, but that they be prepared to hold public office. Not that they vote, but that they be prepared to vote. What are we going to do with the Negroes, having taught the Negroes in Mississippi to despise Barnett, Ross Barnett? Shall we then teach them to emulate their cousins in Harlem and adore Adam Clayton Powell, Jr.? It is much more complicated, sir, than simply the question of giving them the vote. If I were myself a constituent of the community of Mississippi at this moment, what I would do is vote to lift the standards of the vote so as to disqualify 65% of the white people who are presently voting. Not simply to give the...
So the reason why I want to bring that up, and the reason why it's so important, there's two things that are going on there. One thing is the fear of people voting, black people voting, because God forbid if they get the vote, they may start acting like Adam Clayton Powell. They may be a bunch of radicals. They may start trying to push their agenda, right? So, you know, I don't know about giving the blacks the vote until they're ready, until we figure that they're ready. But also what's important here is there is a dialogue on the right now being held, particularly by the conservative Republican running on the right called Vivek Ramaswamy. He is one of the candidates. He will be on the debate stage. And one of the things that he has proposed, and I saw this on the Breakfast Club, that he mentions is creating testing for voting. So in order to qualify to vote, you have to pass a test, a basic test on civics. And outside of the constitutionality of that, outside of the history of of testing in order to vote, outside of the logistical nightmare that would become, you have to begin to wonder, what problem are you solving for? I mean, if you want to create a system of testing, what is the problem with that people should have to pass a basic civics test? I mean, are we saying that people who are voting need to have a certain level of intelligence, or need to be aware of a certain amount of information that's going on politically, be political minded, and that will create better voters? I mean, is that the argument that is truly being made on the right? Because it seems to me that if you're making that argument and you are a supporter of Donald Trump, then you're not going to get too far on the right, because the right, the so-called Trumpism, I call it conservatism, is basically saying that the whole system of government is a deep state, and that the American people are under the thumb of this government. It does not solve for them the issue of how to fix the government. In addition, the whole idea, for instance, Carrie Lake in Arizona is saying that one of the reasons why she lost Donald Trump actually says this as well, is all of these things that were put in place to make it difficult to vote, right? And it was an ironic admission by Kerry Lake, and I think by some others. Particularly, they talked about mail-in ballots, which again is a Republican invention. They loved mail-in ballots for a long time until Donald Trump came in and ruined it for them. There's a lot of data to say that that was one of the main things that prevented Donald Trump from winning, is that people no longer trusted the mail-in ballot, so they had to go in and stand on lines, and a lot of people, it was a total nightmare for them. And some people decided they weren't going to vote because they're elderly, they're, may have some physical ailments and whatnot. They can't get out to the polling station in time. But what's old is new again. 65, Buckley talks about we need to make it harder for white people to vote. 2023, Ramaswamy is talking about we need to make it harder for white people to vote. I cannot imagine that anybody who is a Trump supporter is going to be interested in make it harder to vote for white people. I would love for him to run on that.